The arrival of Alpha King Rowan Blackwood, whose presence changes the air itself, not with force but with calm certainty. And though Elena keeps her gaze lowered as told, she senses the shift, the way conversations stop and shoulders square, the way space opens naturally before him as he takes each measured step, and in the ordinary motion of her duty, she advances one pace too far into the light, just enough that the torch nearest the dais catches her profile, just enough that she looks up for a single heartbeat to orient herself, unaware that in that precise moment the Alpha's eyes lift as well, and across a distance of nearly 40 feet, amid polished stone and silent witnesses, his attention finds her as if drawn by a thread no one else can see. And Elena feels it not as fear, but as warmth, a recognition she does not yet understand, while the hall remains perfectly still, waiting for what comes next. Elena did not understand why her chest felt tight as the Alpha King's attention lingered, only that the space around her seemed to narrow despite the vast hall. And when she lowered her eyes again as she had been taught, the warmth did not fade but settled deeper, steady and unfamiliar, while murmurs rippled softly through the crowd like wind across water, subtle enough to be denied, yet impossible to miss. And Margaret Hart noticed it too, her fingers tightening around the edge of her jeweled shawl as she stepped half a pace forward, placing herself deliberately between Elena and the center of the room, her smile polite and fixed as if nothing had happened, as if the Omega behind her were no more than a shadow cast by the torchlight. But Alpha King Rowan Blackwood had stopped walking, his boots aligned with the edge of the dais, his posture calm, his gaze level, and that stillness commanded more attention than any raised voice could have, causing the elders seated along the stone benches to exchange brief glances, unsure whether protocol had shifted or if time itself had paused, and Elena felt the weight of it without daring to look up again, focusing instead on the steadying rhythm of her breathing and the smooth wood of the tray balanced in her hands, counting each step she took backward toward the outer ring of the hall, yet every movement felt louder now, each footfall echoing as if measured, while the Alpha's presence remained fixed, his attention no longer scanning the assembled candidates, but anchored where she stood moments before, as though the air still carried her imprint. And when he finally spoke, his voice was even, unhurried, carrying clearly across the room without strain, asking for the ceremony to pause, not as a command, but as a certainty that no one questioned, and the musicians lowered their instruments. At once, the quiet that followed pressing against Elena's ears until she could hear her own heartbeat, while Margaret inclined her head politely, already preparing to guide her daughter forward, certain the interruption would favor what had been carefully arranged. But Rowan's eyes did not follow the expected path, instead returning to the edge of the hall where a gray dress blended into stone, and Elena sensed the shift before she saw it, a subtle change like the moment before a summer storm, her instincts urging her to look up despite years of training telling her not to. And when she did, their eyes met again, this time without accident, and she felt neither fear nor submission, only a quiet recognition that steadied her spine. And across the distance Rowan observed the way she stood, unadorned and unpracticed, not presenting herself but simply existing, and something within him aligned with that truth, because power had always been loud around him. But this was not, and the elders waited, the stepmother stiffened, and Elena remained still, unsure whether she was meant to step forward or disappear once more, until Rowan shifted his weight and turned slightly toward the outer ring of the hall, his attention clear enough that no one could mistake it. And in that moment the carefully maintained hierarchy wavered, because what had been hidden was no longer invisible, and Elena felt the realization settle over her slowly, that whatever came next would not be decided by preparation or position, but by having been seen exactly as she was, in the quiet place where she had always been told she did not belong. The silence stretched just long enough to feel deliberate, and Elena sensed every eye in the hall turning toward her even before she shifted her weight, the tray in her hands suddenly feeling heavier than before, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, a role she had been assigned rather than chosen. And when she took one cautious step forward, the sound echoed farther than expected, a reminder that the center of the hall was not meant for her. Yet Alpha King Rowan did not look away, his attention steady, thoughtful, as though he were observing something rare rather than unexpected, and that calm unsettled Margaret more than any open challenge could have, prompting her to speak quickly, her tone smooth and respectful as she offered an explanation that framed Elena as nothing more than household help, an omega present only to serve, her words practiced and carefully shaped to close the moment before it could widen. But Rowan listened without interrupting, his expression unchanged, and when Margaret finished, the quiet that followed carried more weight than her explanation, because it was clear he was considering not her words but the person they attempted to diminish, and Elena felt the strange pull of that attention again, not commanding her forward yet not releasing her either, as if he were allowing her the space to decide who she would be in this moment. And she realized with a small start that no one had ever waited for her choice before, that decisions had always been made around her rather than with her, and though uncertainty trembled at the edges of her resolve, something steadier held her upright, guiding her steps as she moved just beyond the outer ring, stopping where the light fell evenly across her shoulders, and the elders leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift, while murmurs stirred and then faded as Rowan spoke again, asking her name in a voice that did not carry judgment, only interest, and Elena answered clearly, her voice softer than his but unshaken, and the simple exchange altered the room in a way ceremony could not, because names carried recognition, and recognition carried consequence, and Margaret's polite composure faltered for the briefest instant, before she masked it, realizing that what had been hidden by placement and instruction was now visible by intent, and Rowan acknowledged the name with a small nod, as though confirming something already known, his gaze moving briefly across the assembled candidates before returning to Elena, and in that measured look there was no comparison, only assessment, not of status or preparation but of presence. And Elena felt seen not as an omega, meant to fit a role, but as a person standing in her own right, and the realization brought an unexpected calm, grounding her even as the room held its breath, and Rowan shifted his stance slightly, signaling to the elders that the ceremony would continue but not as planned, and the adjustment was subtle yet unmistakable, because when tradition bent, it did so around power that did not need to announce itself. And Elena understood then that nothing about this moment was accidental, not her step into the light, not his attention, not the quiet certainty that settled between them. And as the hall adjusted to this new alignment, she remained where she was, no longer at the edge, not yet at the center, but undeniably present, aware that whatever path unfolded from here would no longer be shaped solely by those who had tried to keep her unseen. As the elders quietly conferred among themselves, Elena remained still, aware that every second she stood there rewrote assumptions that had followed her all her life, and she felt Margaret's gaze pressing into her back like a warning, sharp with calculation, urging her to retreat before the moment solidified into something irreversible. But Alpha King Rowan did not return to the dais as expected. Instead, he took a measured step closer, closing the distance not with urgency, but with intent, and the movement drew a collective inhale from the hall, because proximity carried meaning here, and Rowan was careful with meaning, his presence neither looming nor distant, simply present in a way that invited honesty rather than obedience. And he spoke again, addressing the elders this time, noting that tradition existed to reveal truth, not to conceal it, his words even and controlled, carrying authority without needing emphasis. And Elena felt something in her chest loosen at that, because for the first time the rules that had confined her were being examined rather than enforced, and as the elders nodded slowly, acknowledging the point without fully surrendering their caution, Rowan's attention returned to her, and he asked her to stand where all could see her clearly, not as a command but as an invitation, and the choice rested with her, unmistakably hers, and Elena hesitated only a moment before moving forward, each step steady, her shoulders relaxed despite the weight of attention, and when she stopped at the center mark etched into the stone floor, the hall shifted again, the space accommodating her presence as if it had always been meant to, and she lifted her chin, not in defiance but in quiet acceptance of where she stood, and Rowan observed the way she held herself, noting the absence of practiced gestures, the lack of embellishment, and he recognized in it a strength that did not seek approval. While Margaret's carefully constructed composure began to fracture at the edges, her plan unraveling in silence as the focus moved beyond her control, and the Alpha addressed the assembly, reminding them that a mate was not chosen for appearance or arrangement, but for resonance, for the way two presences aligned without force, and his gaze did not leave Elena as he spoke, making the implication clear without stating it outright, and the elders watched closely, understanding that this moment would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. And Elena felt the significance settle slowly, not as triumph but as clarity, realizing that being seen did not require her to become someone else, only to remain where she was. And when Rowan extended his hand, not touching her but offering the gesture openly, it was understood as acknowledgement rather than claim, a signal that the path forward would be taken with consent, and Elena met his eyes, seeing curiosity there rather than ownership, and she placed her hand lightly above his without contact, a respectful response that spoke to her boundaries as much as her openness, and the hall seemed to exhale at once, tension easing into anticipation, because what unfolded here was not disruption but evolution, tradition responding to truth rather than resisting it. And as Rowan straightened, turning once more to the elders, Elena remained at the center, no longer hidden, no longer peripheral, aware that whatever followed would not erase her past, but would redefine how it mattered. And the ceremony resumed with a new rhythm, one shaped not by who had been prepared, but by who had been truly seen. The ceremony moved forward, but it no longer followed the predictable pattern etched into memory, and Elena felt the change ripple outward from the place where she stood, subtle yet undeniable, as the elders announced the next phase with measured formality, while their attention flickered between Alpha King Rowan and the Omega at the center of the hall, and the